All right, so welcome back from the break. Um, so what we've spent all of our time talking about so far is the community's vision, but now it's time to shift gears and add to that conversation the community's values. Uh, those could encompass any number of things. That's what makes guardrails such a challenging but also powerful conversation, because whatever it is the community values, those are eligible areas for the board to identify guardrails in. What you've done that will most help you identify guardrails is you've gone out and you've listened to the community to get a sense of, well, what are the things that the community most values. Some of the information that you've garnered from the community is going to help you in being thoughtful and about refining some of your potential goals. But a lot of it, as I've read, is going to help you in being thoughtful about identifying what are our guardrails. And so, to support you in this, the document that your staff has put together is they took all of the feedback from the different sessions that you all led and put it together in an outreach meeting summary document. And so, what I invite you to do is take a moment and browse through that document. It's a CCS 5-year strategic plan goal setting outreach meetings is the title of the document. It describes some of the main overall themes as well as a summary of responses. Take a moment and browse through that document. What I'll ask you at the end of your browsing, if you had to lift up two major uh, values that come across for you, what would those be? And I'll ask you to point to the specific line that tells that. So I'm not asking you to think of this yourself. I'm asking you as you browse through this, try to keep track of what are some of the major theme, a major value that comes out of the document, and then what are the two that most resonate for you? And again, I'll be asking you to point exactly to where in the document that you're lifting those from. So take a moment and read through the document. I know a few people are still reading, but if you had to lift up two really important values that stand out to you in this document, what would those two be? Who will be the first to share?
I can start.
Ramona, you got it. Carol, you're on deck. What do you got for us?
So I know that I'm supposed, so now I'm going to try to remember where it was. So in 2 or 3 areas, I saw communication. Um, I mean, accurate and effective communication. Oh, they're not numbered. Um, so the first question, we had accurate and effective communication. Anything ensuring that we include as many people in our communication, to language. And then I saw it again, the things that are not working and we should stop, the inconsistent communication, right?
Yeah.
So it's telling us to do it better. And,
Yeah.
and I think we've talked about that for several years, and many organizations struggle with the communication.
Got it. Excellent. Thank you. And thank you for going first. Carol, what you got? Eric, you're on deck.
Communication and engagement.
Where did you see those? Or what is a quote that you would pull out of this document?
Oh, you were looking for quotes. Sorry. I was just, okay, I'll pick one that was a little bit unusual. And it was, I think, from a summary I gave. Improve communication coordination efforts between schools, programs, and human resources. Sort of internal process communication. We know we got to work on communication with parents. We know we got to work on communication with teachers and all that. But this is a subtle communication problem that I think gums up the works a lot, in terms of our right hand and our left hand not communicating well. And I think that that's something to be mindful of. And the engagement, it's the, I'm just going to say what I'm thinking rather than find a quote, because it's the key to successful student outcomes is relationship at the end of the day. And engagement is critical to have that relationship. And so the more intentional we are about improving our engagement, both with the kids and with their families, the better our outcomes will be. And that treating that as a value of the community, hence it's something we're intentional about, even though it's a little counterintuitive because it's not actual nuts and bolts instruction, will give us bang for the buck.
Gotcha. Thank you. Eric, you're up.
Thank you. Two of them. First, it's actually mentioned in 3 places in different ways. In the first response to the first question, preparing students for success section, is more students into trade skills. Start younger to expose students of the skilled trade industry. 2 bullet points later is market the career tech programs to the public more, and I think those are closely related. And then with respect to question 2, there's an item about, right at the very end of the response to question 2, no value put on skilled trades, downgrading, devaluing skilled trades. And that's simply the flip side. So that's one of the 2. The other that I'd identify is response to question 3, the third subhead, the third bullet, continue improving and upgrading physical facilities. I think that also reflects community interest a great deal. Um, and I did notice, at least for me, there is some disconnect between what I believe and what the community is telling us. And there are times where, I can let that go, and other times where I need to figure out a better way to reconcile. But I'm good with those two.
Those two, sure. Would you say, I don't want to put words in your mouth. So how would you describe those two? Because you had several different aspects of trade skills. So how would you most want to describe that?
Well, I was,
because what I wrote down was more students in trade skills, but I don't think that fully captures your point.
well, I did it by, specific reference to what was written here. And I would say that it's increase student participation in trade skills education.
Okay, and the other?
And the other was continue improving and upgrading physical facilities.
Got it. All right, who's next? All right, James, take it away.
Thank you. Both of mine are around communication. The district and its board is centering at the loudest stakeholders, organized PTAs, et cetera, instead of reaching out to the least served and centering at the margins. That has been a consistent problem that I've felt that we have had for decades as a district. I know we're trying to tackle that, but this specifically says centering. So meaning that we go there first in how we do what we do and how we communicate what we communicate. And that takes a different emphasis from the board and the administration. So I thought that was very important. And then my second was to our new Americans community. Translation of announcements and documents needs to happen in real time. That was something that prior to us going out to our stakeholders, I did not understand was not happening. But we were given very specific feedback around how information is translated to our new Americans community within the city of Columbus. And oftentimes a lot of our information, by the time it is translated and communicated to our new Americans community, it may even be dated, but it's always after the general communication goes out. And so I thought that would be, being that we have such a large new Americans community within the district, I think that is very important. And then it goes back to my centering at the margins as well. Those were the two for me.
Got it. Thank you.
I can go next.
Okay.
Mine first one centers on in two areas of this. I've seen the word standardization a few times. One around more of an individual approach to student learning, and the other just stop it. And for me, it feels more like the community is telling us, be more creative, be more innovative, be more thoughtful about what you're doing. And specifically, around let teachers be more creatives, stop whatever we consider, they wrote it, traditional teaching. So I know that probably feels there's a lot of standardization because of all the assessments and tests and things like that. But that struck me, this idea of what I'm interpreting as being more creative, but this idea of standardization not being a good thing. And the other was around staff morale and leadership coaching. And that for me is foundational, because these are the people that carry out the mission. So whatever we decide the goals are, and that Dr. Dixon will have to create strategies for, it's these individuals that we will task with helping us to accomplish them. So making sure that they have what is necessary and have the right morale. So those two struck me.
Yeah. Just a quick process question. Misty, I know that we've opened up comments to online in addition to the sessions that the board members are leading. Does this summary include that, or is that still yet to come?
This includes that as well.
Okay, thank you. And also, folks, big shout out to Misty, who took all of the voluminous data from all of these meetings, all the online, and has crunched it into this document. And she was receiving information up until very recently. So she put in the real on this one. So thank you so much for your leadership in this work, Misty. Let's see. Who wants to go next? I think we only have one person left. I think, Tina, you're it.
All right. Well, the first thing that struck me was the professional development and training. This stands out to me because one of the things that I overheard, and I've been in a couple of trainings myself this past week, was the real question that we need to be asking as educators is not how do we maintain or bring some good of what we're doing currently to respond to COVID-19, but how do we do it in such a way that it makes how we educate students better? And so for me, professional development and training is really the foundation of that. How do we make the educational experience better given how we've responded during COVID-19? The next thing that stood out to me was parent engagement and outreach. And I think that when you think about the challenges that lay ahead, we've had students that have lost some of the gains that they were making in terms of learning. Their morale, their social emotional is at low levels. Mentally, they are ready to probably check out, take a break, and be with peers and friends in a way to rekindle relationships so they can get back to learning. And so we're going to have strong relationships with our community and parents, that we recognize when it's time for us to pump the brakes and not push so much. When it's time to let our kids be kids, we're going to have to respond, I think, in a different way to the social emotional needs of our students as we move back into the classroom and move forward. So those were the two things that stood out to me.
Got it. Thank you very much. Before we step into the next activity, I want to give you a quick moment to reflect. You all went out and in pairs created opportunities to just listen. You contacted a variety of different community organizations that you all brainstormed, and you asked to get on the agenda, and you went out and you did a lot of listening, just capturing. So obviously we have the summary document, so we know what was captured. But I just want to open the floor for a moment. What was that like for you to go out and engage in that listening as part of this process? Who will be the first to share? Just the opportunity to reflect. What was that like for you? Yeah, Jennifer.
It was fun. It was really fun to connect with the community, to listen. I think the biggest takeaway that I got from that experience was the fact that we're trying, we're doing a better job, but we still have a lot of work to do to tell our story about the work we are currently doing. I found that, especially when we talked about we started posing some of the questions, and they would sit there for a minute and they'd say, I really don't know what you are doing, so how would I know what to tell you to stop doing? So, I mean, and we took notes on that because that's right there during the question. So, but, it was just a lot of, especially if they didn't have a child in the district, and there was a lot of feedback. I participated in more of the, like our community neighborhood groups. and a request that, we continue to go out and engage with them was something that, they really enjoyed. So it was fun, and I had fun going with my partners. I think we had a good time. Was able to partner with almost everybody. But yeah, I think just, and understanding, and I guess it shouldn't have been a shock, because I was just a few years ago on the other side of the table in the community, not knowing either. So, but we have so much going on in our district, and we're all moving at light speed, and it feels like that to us, but we don't always do the best job. But we're working on it because we have a lot going on. But telling our story. So that was my biggest takeaway.
James, I saw you wanted to jump in there, and then we'll take one more before we transition. So if somebody else wants to.
Completely agree with President Adair on everything that she said. I especially appreciate the feedback that we got, that we were adding value to them by doing something that hadn't been done. Almost to every single one that I participated in, every one of them encouraged us to not only do it again, but find other ways in which we could engage in getting feedback from the public on a person-to-person level. It was very interesting, the discussions that we had. It took a lot for me to not jump back in there. And so thank you, AJ, and thank you to my colleagues for the training in advance of the discussion. It was really good to fall back on the president and the vice president's modeling of an event before I actually went out and did my own. But we've got to continue to do that.
Yes.
What it is that we're doing moving forward. I think it lends itself to new credibility for not just this board, but for the district as a whole, to the community. New credibility is what we were all after, and I think that this process was spot on in helping us to get there. So kudos to all of those that were involved in it. Thank you for letting me share.
One more board member want to share? You don't have to. We can keep it moving. Ramona, yeah.
Sure. I think I may have shared with James, but what made this different than what we've done before is that we got to do it. The board got to do it. And in some of the listening sessions that we've had in the past, it's been maybe led by one board member and maybe a consultant. So we've had people out in the community getting feedback. So having us actually online, obviously through Zoom, which is different also, but actually us being the asking the question and listening, and I think that gave totally a different perspective than we want your feedback, but here's the consultant, and that consultant will, which is not a bad thing. I'm just saying it's just it definitely gave us a better connection to the process and a better connection to the community that we are elected to serve.
Yeah. Well, the two areas where you all will certainly, as we continue down this journey, will go out in much similar ways that you've done now, is one, the path you're on is a radical departure from how you've been governing in the past few years. You have an obligation to communicate that. You have a proactive obligation to go to community members and say, this is how we used to function. We are planning to go to functioning in this way. And let me tell you why. Let me describe the focus that we'll be able to place on what's possible, what's happening with our students as a result of making this change. But that is a story that your staff cannot tell. That is not for your CFO. You have to tell that story. So that's one area where you'll have to go back and engage. And that will just be a regular ongoing, every year, once or twice a year, you'll need to go out and communicate with community members. Say, here's how we govern in a way that's focused on what's possible for students, and here's why this is the way we do it. Yep, we understand everybody else does it that way. Good for them. As for me and my house, this is what we're focused on. The other thing that will cause you to go out is as the district produces results, whether they be the results you want or the results you don't want, You have asked the community what their vision and values are. You have an obligation to go out and report back to the community on where you have or haven't fulfilled on the vision and where you have or haven't honored the values. And so it doesn't matter what the data says. It says you did great. It says you haven't yet done great. Either way, the community has a right to know that, and you have been selected by them to be their representative, which means you have an obligation to go and communicate that. That is not something you just can put on the superintendent. You have to be prepared to stand and deliver and articulate, yes, these are the areas we got it done, and these are the areas where we have not yet gotten it done. And so those are two areas, community education, and then just accountability back to the community, reporting out to them on results. Well, you definitely will need to go 2 by 2 back onto the community. Kara?
Now that you just answered my question.
Yeah. So what we're going to do again is we're going to take a similar approach to what we did before. Only now, instead of being focused on the goals, now we're going to be focused on the guardrails. Where the goals describe, here are the things that we want to see possible for our students. The guardrails say, here are the values that have to be honored. Generally speaking, when we describe guardrails, we're describing these in terms of what is it we don't want to see the school district do. And so maybe we don't want to see the school district make choices without actually communicating with key stakeholders first. I think that was an example that I heard mentioned earlier. Whatever it is, whatever the values are, it's your obligation to communicate those to the staff in such a way that they understand what the expectation is. And so what I want you to do is I want you to write down no more than 3, no fewer than 1. What are potential guardrails? And as I did before, I will give you a little bit of support with this by sharing my screen again. So meaningful guardrails describe what the school system is not allowed to do. So an example that I just gave, the superintendent will not make choices without communicating with impacted staff and stakeholders. I'm just making one up. But based on the feedback that we receive from the community, maybe that's a particular guardrail that is of particular importance. And so you describe, like, superintendent, you can do whatever you want. Like, we are not telling you that you can't lead. What we are telling you is that the quality of your leadership will be that before you make choices, go talk to people. So that's a potential guardrail. It's intended to be a protection around the things that we value most. In particular, meaningful guardrails describe what the school system is not allowed to do. So I've given you one particular example, just like I did before. At this time, go ahead and write down no fewer than 1, no more than 3 potential guardrails that you believe will best honor the values of the community. You all have identified a bunch of different areas from your listening of potential guardrails. Now your task is to come up with 1 to 3 statements of what the district or the superintendent or CFO or whomever, what will the school system not do? What is disallowed because it would be a violation of the values that you've gone out and listened for? Go ahead and write down no fewer than one, no more than three potential guardrails. Guardrails are a lot like the Ten Commandments. They describe what won't happen. What will the school system not do? I know a few people are still typing, but we'll go ahead and listen in. So of the ones that you came up, which one of those most resonates for you? Of the 1 to 3 you came up with, which one most resonates, James?
So does this have to be a not statement? The guard, you would prefer that it's a not statement? Okay.
And don't worry about that. Tell me what you want to do, and then we can work on it together.
Okay, Columbus City Schools will not allow the needs of adults to supersede the needs of students and families.
That's pretty straightforward.
James took mine. I'll pick another one.
Okay.
All right.
That's
So
cool.
I want to make sure I wrote this down. Columbus City Schools will not allow the needs of adults to supersede the needs of students and families.
Yes.
Can I write that down? All right.
Yes, sir.
Eric, what you got?
No board or staff member may promise what they cannot deliver.
CCS board and staff members may not promise what they cannot deliver. Got it. Who'll be the next to share? Which one of yours most resonates for you? Yeah, Ramona?
The school system will not stop engaging the community and asking for feedback.
Yeah. It's not a one-time thing, huh? We did it back in '88. I don't see what the problem is. Yeah. Carol, did you have one?
I'm struggling a bit, but I think I have one. The district will provide no less than, I don't know, 20 hours of professional development per teacher per year, including ongoing coaching.
So district will provide no less than 20 hours of PD and coaching per teacher per year?
Yeah. And I don't know if that 20 is a good number or a bad number, but
Yeah. No, we're brainstorming. Yeah.
Right.
Brainstorming, got it. Who else? What are we missing here?
Okay, I'll give my other
Okay.
one. You can put a star by the one James said, because that was really my.
Because he took yours.
The district will not create work environments where staff at any level feel devalued or underappreciated on our path to equity.
So the district will not create work environments where staff feel devalued or underappreciated on our path to equity. Did I hear that
Staff
correctly?
at any level or all levels. No
Staff
staff.
at all levels.
Every staff. Yeah, every member of our team.
All. All right. Who's next?
So mine is a very general one, but one that's very concrete. And the district board nor staff will convene a meeting without a clearly defined and shared objective for that meeting. So like on top where the agenda is, it should have objective, and that should be clearly stated for all meetings.
Neither CCS board nor staff will convene a meeting without a defined objective for the meeting. Got it. I think that is that 6. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. And I will. Sorry, I meant to already share. So to give you a sense of what you have all written, here are the latest contributions to the conversation. So what we'll do is we'll take all of these notes that I've taken, any additional notes that staff have been taking as well, and we'll put all of this together and I'll collaborate with them to try to come back to you, see if we can narrow down to, maybe 5 or 6 max potential goals, potential guardrails based on all the feedback that you all provided. And then the next round of this, when we come back together, then you'll have something to react to that is based on the work that you all have done here. From that point, at that session, your goal will be to get it down to as few as you can possibly get it down to that you feel adequately represents the vision and values of the community, while being as focused as you possibly can be. So having only 1 or 2 or 3 goals will allow you to be more focused and likely produce more organizational performance improvements than having 4 or 5 goals. So if you have to have 5, you have to have 5. But the fewer you have, the more the superintendent and staff are able to really pour resources and intentionality into those fewer. Fewer goals and guardrails means more focus. More goals and guardrails means less focus. And so just keep that in mind when we come back together, that the intention is, how do we begin to narrow this down to what we absolutely, the highest leverage, highest need areas and goals, and the most vital, critical values, and guardrails. Before I move to winding us down for the evening, what questions or comments do you have about any of the work we've done this evening? Yeah, Carol, I saw you first, then Ramona.
Does that not force us, but does that naturally lead to more general guardrails then, if you're going to have fewer of them?
So that is your choice. I personally would encourage I personally encourage more specificity and being really specific in a small number of areas, recognizing you're not going to be able to say everything. And I would just go in accepting there are going to be dozens of things that you don't get to say if you want to be more focused. However, yes, you could also just have each statement be much more broad. So these ones in particular are fairly specific. You could have them be much more broad to cover a bigger area. And if that's what you need to do that.
Well, like, for example, I mean, mine was really specific because I did the one about professional development. Jen's was really broad.
Mm-hmm.
But
and where you land on that is entirely up to you all.
But can I just play it out for a second? So
yeah,
if Jen says no one will be devalued in the whole organization,
mm-hmm.
it seems to me measuring that
That's the superintendent's job.
Or how do
Again,
we find out? Okay, all right.
So what happens after the board has really kind of landed on a set of goals and guardrails is in the next phase is the superintendent will come back with a set of progress measures for the goals and the guardrails. Say, here are the formative and interim metrics that we'll rely on that will give you evidence that we're actually making progress toward these goals or that we are honoring these guardrails. And so again, not your job to make the superintendent's life simple. Your job is to represent the vision and value of the community. She's got to go figure out how to measure these things. Now, what often happens, so I'll just give you the punchline before you leave here, is the board will say, I want to measure, how many hairs on the head of every child. And the superintendent, she'll go out and figure out how to measure, the number of hairs on every head on every child. But guess what? That's going to take a lot of time and a lot of money. And so she'll tell you, oh yeah, we could do that. Here's what it'll cost in time and resources. We're gonna have to take about 10 days of instruction out of the calendar so we can pull each little AJ aside and uncurl every individual nap to figure out how many of them there are. And then we're gonna have to spend X amount of dollars because we're gonna have to get lice deterrent, to make sure that we protect PPE for the staff. I mean, so she'll lay it all out. And then at that point, you'll have to decide, is the juice really worth the squeeze? And so at this point, I would encourage you to lean into what is, thank you for your service, Eric, of being easy to have hair to count. At that point, you'll have to make the decision of to what extent, is this really something that we have to have? And if you do, then the superintendent has her marching orders and she'll move forward with counting hairs. And if not, then you all have to decide, okay, what's our fallback point? Like, okay, so if it's not that, maybe it's like we just want to measure how many kids, have access to a haircut, who want one. I mean, so that's going to be for you all to negotiate. But my encouragement to you is start with the values of the community, figure out where that lands you, and then decide what steps to take from there.
So is one of the step in this process that we take a first cut at this and then we turn to Dr. Dixon and say, give us a ballpark of how hard these are or how much they'll cost? And then we might adjust our goals based on her reaction?
Yeah. So for example, with your goals, I can already imagine with some of your goals, there may not be immediately obvious data for them.
Yeah.
And so she's going to have to go out and figure out how would we measure this and then come back to you and say, okay, here's how we would measure this. And anytime you're dealing with goals, if you're looking for new data, that probably means new assessment or a different assessment, but potentially doesn't mean more time assessing, doesn't mean replacing an existing assessment. If it's something we already use, how much does it cost? I mean, and so yeah, all those issues will come up, and as a board, you'll have to prioritize from there. So, but all that'll be part of a future conversation. Yeah, this is there's some iteration here that we'll have to work through. It's a normal part of the process. Other questions? Yeah, Mona?
I think that's why I was going with Carol, kind of more of the process. So right now we're just kind of going through what goal setting is, what guardrail setting is, and then our next step is really coming back with some solid examples.
So what will happen next is I'll work with your staff and take all of the feedback you've given us this evening. And I've been showing you the notes on screen. That's exactly what I'm going to email to your staff. We're going to take all of that from you and then see if we can come up with a set of potential goals and a set of potential guardrails based on your feedback. And that is just to create a straw document for you all to reflect on. So we're not trying to put anything in stone at that point. But hopefully we'll do our job well, and you'll be like, yeah, actually that's pretty darn close to what we were thinking. And so when we come together, ideally, the next time we can go from ideation to really kind of land, this is the draft we want to move forward with. And then based on that, then the superintendent can really bring some more reality to it and start to identify what are potential progress measures and things of that nature. And so then it's probably another meeting after that before you'd say, okay, this is our part. These are going to be our goals and guardrails. Now, superintendent, start putting together the strategic plan that lets us know how you're going to accomplish these goals and guardrails. But we're probably still a couple meetings away from that, at least.
So it does not mean that they can't come back with something that we may have missed. Because I'm
Yeah. So if they think there's a huge gap, it's the staff's responsibility to lift that up for you. Or conversely, now that you all have been through this, what I guarantee will happen, because I have met you all at this point, is y'all going to go home and have some new ideas. I would like to prevent it, but I am unable. That is just how you all roll. And so what'll happen at the next session, you'll look at the document that we bring back to and say, you know what? I realized after we left, here's a gap. And then we'll have a conversation about, do we need to insert that instead of one of the others that's in there? So this is still an iterative process. Like I said, tonight was just the brainstorming phase. You don't need to be too worried that things are in concrete yet. Jennifer, and then I think James was next. And then
Okay, so when we went out and we talked to the community, sometimes we could get to the portrait stuff, sometimes we didn't have time, and we did the priority. So we didn't really talk so much about the portrait attribute. And so how does that then, because that work, it kind of got started before we did, and we're how are we incorporating that into what we're creating, because we didn't actually talk about it.
Yeah, so that's a really good point. And this is an oversight of mine. What I should have done is brought that document back this evening while we were busy brainstorming goals. I took for granted that it was part of your community engagement, but you're right. In the feedback from community engagement, a lot of folks just didn't get there. And so just expect that one of the things I'll work with your staff to do is that if there is a particular goal inspired by your portrait, that I'll ask them to surface that and we bring it back. And maybe there will be. So for example, what's in the portrait but is not show up in any of the things that you all described is anything around critical thinking, for example. And so maybe the staff will say, hey, you know what, the one thing that ties all these together that the board members didn't mention was a goal about critical thinking and how we're growing that skill set in our students. We need to insert a goal about that. And so we'll do that proactively, look for missings like that. But I'll also ask Misty to send out the portrait information to you all again, so that when we're gearing up for the next session, that'll also be fresh in your mind. And so that's just another piece of input, because that is based on feedback that's been received, so it makes sense to honor that. I think Tina, you're next.
I think.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think, yeah, James.
No, mine is really quick, but it goes to being proactive. Being that board member Cole was not able to continue with us this evening, make sure that we are intentional in getting his input on what we discussed tonight.
Absolutely.
I don't want us to move forward without having his feedback be included in the responses that we got today. And so if somebody, maybe.
Yeah, I'll take personal responsibility for reaching out.
Thank
to
you.
him.
I did not want my brother to be left out of this discussion. So
yeah,
thank you.
What I did write down is he did offer one recommendation earlier that he'd like to see a guardrail specific to facility management. So that's different from what anyone else has brought up. But I'll take responsibility. And if Misty, I don't know if you can help connect us, but find a time, for he and I. To connect, get his feedback, and then you see the next round of these notes. I'll make sure that there's items that reflect Michael's input as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you, AJ.
Yeah, Tina.
So I'm not sure how this fits into the process, but I understand why we're taking the steps that we're taking, and I'm enjoying the process. The reason I stated what I stated about meetings is because sometimes we can often meet with community members, meet with groups, meet as a team, and not have a clear objective around why we're meeting. And to me, that connects clearly to change. And so in this process, can you explain to me when we can expect to see that change management aligned or linked in to our operations, to our processes? I want to see the way that we do business also change. I want to see more directive around how we do what we do. I don't think you can tackle communication and being consistent in communication without having an expert who understands change management and how you need to change processes and operations come in. So for me, it's hard to move to guardrails when I know there's a whole mountain of operations and processes that we need to change related to change management. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
a part of this has to deal with that heavy lift. Because if not, all of that we've done and that we're saying is for naught. Because we're putting it in organizational structure that will eat it alive.
Yeah. There's actually, there's a few good sources that I really enjoy about this. I mean, everybody points to, Cotter's work, around leading change, Zagarmi's work around who killed change. So, I enjoy Keegan and Leahy's work around immunity to change. But all this speaks to when change happens, it actually creates a really powerful experience, for humans. Like there's a kind of this default resistance to it, and not out of a sense of negativity, just out of a sense of curiosity, wonder, and potential concern. And you're correct. It's your job as a team to manage that change as it relates to board work. So right now we're putting together the baseline tools for governance work. But once we have these tools together, there's a whole suite of efforts that you all are going to have to engage in. We will build a complete timeline. That timeline will probably be 12 to 18 months out that says, this week we do this week we do this week we do this week we do this. Once we have that timeline, once you have your goals and guardrails, then we can build that timeline. And then that timeline, I recommend you post on your website and say, here is the work plan that we're iterating through. And here's what we're trying to accomplish. We're changing our behaviors with an intention that as adult behavior changes in the boardroom, it creates the context for and empowers necessary changes in the classroom. That will free up our educators to really experience their own greatness. But to cause that, we have to lead by example. We have to do that first for ourselves. And so you'll lay that out for folks and then give them the timeline of exactly what it looks like. So all that part is coming. We just don't have the tools yet. And once we have these tools, then we begin, the really challenging work of implementation. We'll have implementation metrics. So we will measure, is the board actually honoring its word, or is the board completely fake? These are questions of change management and implementation. We're coming there. And on that cheery note, Madam Chair, we're at time. I hand it back to you.
Thank you so much. I personally try not to use the word change because that people are scared of that word. I always like to say we are transforming, and we are definitely in a time of transformation in our district. And thank you all board members for yet another wonderful conversation. Thank you, AJ, for leading us through this work. It is always really great to see you and be with you. So we're excited for our next steps with you, and probably some additional homework, because I think we still want to go out and talk to some people.
Oh yeah.
So yeah. Okay, well, thank you, AJ. And the last thing we have to do is adjourn. And yes, right on cue, here is our treasurer. Is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I move to.
Before,
go ahead, Dr. Pierce.
motion to adjourn, I would just encourage everybody to read that text, Immunity to Change. AJ suggested that I read it. It is eye-opening.
Powerful.
It's a good read. It's a powerful read. So I would just encourage everybody to read that. And with that stated, I motion that we adjourn.
Thank you.
Well, then I'll second.
Thank you. Please
And
call the
thanks
roll.
to AJ. Appreciate it.
All set?
Yep.
Okay. Ms. Beckerly,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Dr. Pierce,
Yes.
Mr. Ragland,
Yes.
Vice President Reyes,
Yes.
President Adair.
Yes.
That motion carried.
Thank you. Good night, everyone. See you
Good night,
next week.
everyone. Thank you. Thank you, AJ.
Good night.